Imagine waking up one day and realizing that nothing moves you anymore. The world hums around you. Cars pass, people talk, screens glow, yet something inside you has gone silent. You're not angry, not sad, not even tired. You simply don't care. And that realization terrifies you more than any pain ever could. You used to believe that caring was what made you human, that passion, empathy, and connection were the proof of your soul's vitality. You cared about success, love, injustice, meaning. You argued, you tried. You bled for your beliefs, but now standing in the quiet aftermath of too many disappointments, too many betrayals, you begin to see indifference not as a weakness, but as something else, something ancient, something powerful. What if indifference isn't the absence of feeling, but the final evolution of it? There's a strange kind of serenity in not being moved by what once tore you apart. The chaos of the world begins to look almost poetic from a distance. You start to see how people burn themselves out, endlessly reacting, endlessly needing. Their emotions are puppets pulled by invisible strings, validation, fear, desire. And for the first time you wonder, what if the real freedom lies not in caring more, but in caring less? Yet, there's a danger in that thought. Because indifference wears two faces. One belongs to the awakened soul, the person who has transcended the noise of the world, who sees beyond praise and insult, gain and loss, love and hatred. The other face belongs to the hollow shell, the one who has stopped feeling not because they have risen above the world, but because the world has broken them. So, which are you becoming? The liberated or the lost? We are told from birth that to be human is to feel deeply, that apathy is decay, that numbness is death. Every movie, every speech, every story glorifies emotion. The passionate lover, the righteous rebel, the one who cares enough to fight. But what if this obsession with emotion blinds us to the quiet truth that lies on the other side of it? What if indifference, when understood, is not death, but mastery? You begin to notice how easily the world manipulates those who care too much. Politicians weaponize outrage. Corporations monetize desire. Algorithms feed you what you love and what you hate until you're addicted to reaction. Every scroll, every click, every thought becomes an offering to forces that thrive on your attention. You think you are choosing, but you are being played. And yet, there's one type of person who cannot be controlled, the indifferent one. Because the indifferent cannot be provoked. They cannot be seduced by promises, nor destroyed by insults. They move through chaos untouched. Not because they are blind, but because they see too clearly. They have stared into the mechanisms of manipulation and realized how trivial most human drama really is. But here's the paradox. The same power that can make a person free can also make them inhuman. Indifference can be enlightenment, or it can be apathy. It can lead to peace, or to a coldness that consumes everything it touches. So how do you tell the difference? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "The greatest wisdom consists in the suppression and pacification of the will." To be indifferent, in his eyes, was to silence the constant hunger of wanting, to step beyond desire and suffering alike. Yet Nietzsche looked upon that same indifference and called it nihilism, the slow death of spirit, the sickness of a world that has lost its reason to care. Both were right, both were wrong, because indifference, like fire, can both illuminate and destroy. It is not good or evil. It is a force. The question is whether you can wield it, or whether it will consume you. Perhaps that's the great test of modern humanity. Not whether we can feel, but whether we can rise above the compulsions that feelings bring. To look at a world on fire and not flinch, not out of cruelty but clarity. To see the storm and walk calmly through it. not because you are numb, but because you understand. But how does one reach that state? And how do you prevent it from turning into a void? Because there's a thin, trembling line between wisdom and withdrawal, between emotional mastery and emotional death, between liberation and loss of humanity. And somewhere, deep down, you already sense that the indifference within you is growing. Quietly, patiently, like a shadow you once feared but are now beginning to recognize as your own reflection. So the question becomes, when the world can no longer make you feel, have you become less human, or something more? There's a quiet point in every human life, a breaking so subtle you don't even hear it. It doesn't come with tragedy or betrayal, but with something slower, quieter, like erosion. You wake up one morning and realize, the things that once stirred your soul no longer do. The victories you chased feel weightless. The losses you feared barely sting. Somewhere along the way, the emotional compass that once guided you has stopped pointing anywhere at all. But this isn't just personal fatigue. It's a symptom of something much deeper, something buried in the architecture of the modern mind. We are a species overstimulated into silence. Every sound, every image, every opinion screams for our attention. The human nervous system, once designed to hunt, to love, to create, now lives in constant alert. We scroll, react, respond, perform. Every emotion is turned outward, commodified, shared. We live not to feel, but to be seen feeling. And what happens to a mind constantly forced to perform emotion? It burns out, it retreats, it becomes indifferent. Carl Jung called it psychic exhaustion, the moment when the ego collapses under the weight of too much noise. The mind, desperate to protect itself, begins to shut doors, numb sensations, detach from what once mattered. It's not a failure of character. It's a defense mechanism of the soul, the same mechanism that makes a soldier stop shaking after too many battles, or a lover stop crying after too many goodbyes. Indifference, then, is not born from coldness. It is born from too much heat, too many emotions, too much caring, too much reaching into a world that never reaches back. But here's where the paradox deepens. While indifference begins as protection, it can easily transform into imprisonment. Once you stop feeling, you stop connecting. Once you stop connecting, you stop growing. The very shield that once protected you begins to suffocate you. Nietzsche warned of this state, the slow death of the will. He called it the weariness that wants to reach the end of all things. When a person loses the will to strive, to hope, to engage, they become a spectator to life itself. They drift through existence, unhurt but unmoved. They confuse peace with stagnation, serenity with emptiness. And yet, our culture almost celebrates this state. We praise those who are unbothered, detached, above it all. But beneath that surface calm often lies despair, wearing a mask of control. Why does this happen to so many of us? Because the modern world runs on manufactured intensity. Our emotions are not just personal, they are marketable. Outrage keeps people scrolling. Desire keeps people buying. Fear keeps people obedient. The system depends on your reactions. It feeds on your energy. So what happens when the soul realizes it's being exploited? It rebels, not with anger, but with withdrawal. That withdrawal, that numbness, is the soul's quiet protest against manipulation. It is your inner voice saying, "Enough, I refuse to be used anymore." But in cutting itself off from pain, it also cuts off from joy. The human psyche, in its desperate need to protect, knows no subtlety. When it closes one door, it locks them all. This is why indifference feels both powerful and terrifying. It gives you control, but it takes away color. It grants you peace, but at the cost of meaning. Viktor Frankl, The psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." In suffering, he found purpose. But imagine if he had chosen indifference. Instead, if he had said, "None of this matters," he would have survived, yes, but without meaning. And survival without meaning is not living. So what is the hidden root of indifference? It is not apathy. It is not laziness. It is disillusionment. Disillusionment with false promises, with superficial emotions, with a world that mistakes reaction for connection. You were told that feeling everything made you alive, but feeling everything made you hollow. You were told that success would bring peace, but success only amplified your emptiness. You were told that love was salvation, but love became another transaction, another way to be consumed. So now, you stand on the edge of that disillusionment, staring at the world with a quiet, unshakable neutrality. You no longer hate or love it. You simply see it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of real perception. Jean-Paul Sartre called this nausea, the moment you recognize that existence has no inherent meaning, and yet you are still here, breathing, aware. In that awareness, a strange freedom emerges. When nothing inherently matters, everything becomes possible. But that realization is too heavy for most. They retreat into distraction, or despair, or cynicism. Few dare to stay in that raw space long enough to find what lies beyond it. The transformation of indifference into clarity. Because that's the hidden truth. Indifference is not the end of feeling. It's the crossroads. You can walk toward decay, or transcendence, toward numbness, or awakening. One direction leads to a gray, quiet death where nothing matters. The other leads to something profound, a stillness where meaning can finally be rebuilt, not imposed by others, but chosen by you. But first, you must confront the uncomfortable reality that much of what you once cared about was never truly yours. Your emotions were conditioned responses. Your beliefs, inherited scripts. Your ambitions, reflections of a culture that equated busyness with worth. And when all those illusions fall away, what remains? Just silence. The terrifying silence of true freedom. It is in that silence that indifference is born, and it is from that same silence that the possibility of rebirth begins. You begin to understand that indifference is not the death of passion, but the death of illusion. It strips away everything false until you are left with something pure. Awareness without attachment. But can awareness without attachment coexist? With love? With meaning? With life itself? Or does the awakening of indifference inevitably lead to the extinction of what makes us human? That is the question that will define the rest of your journey. At first, it feels harmless, even peaceful. You start pulling away from things that once consumed you. The endless arguments, the competitions, the fragile egos performing significance. You watch people chase attention like moths drawn to the light of their own destruction. You scroll through the noise of the world and feel nothing. Just a quiet detachment, a kind of internal stillness that once seemed impossible. You tell yourself this is control, that you've finally risen above the chaos. But indifference, like all power, has a hidden appetite. It grows quietly, not through force, but through absence. It does not demand your attention. It erodes it. You begin to notice its fingerprints in your relationships. Someone tells you they're hurting, and though you understand the words, they no longer move you. A friend confides their fears, and your empathy, once a flood, now feels like a faint ripple. You say the right things, but there's a distance behind them, as if you're watching life unfold through glass. And it's not just you. Look closer, and you'll see that indifference has become a global epidemic. The quiet plague of the Modern soul. We are connected more than ever, yet care less than ever. We see war, suffering, despair, all rendered in pixels and algorithms. We double tap, we scroll, we move on. The human heart, once raw and responsive, has adapted to survive an overstimulated world by growing a callus over its sensitivity. That callus is what we now call normal. Indifference has become the default state of the age. It protects us from drowning in endless empathy, but it also drowns empathy itself. The philosopher Aldous Huxley warned of this future, not one ruled by tyranny, but by triviality, a world so saturated with information and entertainment that the human mind loses the ability to care deeply about anything. And here we are, living in that prophecy, not oppressed by dictators, but by distractions, not silenced by fear, but by fatigue. Indifference, then, is not just a personal emotion. It's a cultural condition. It shapes our politics, our relationships, our art. It governs how we consume reality itself. Think about it. Outrage sells, but only briefly. The system no longer needs your loyalty, just your attention. It knows you'll care passionately for a moment, then forget completely. In Nasha, that endless cycle of stimulation and apathy, the soul learns one lesson above all: nothing lasts. And when nothing lasts, nothing matters. That is the quiet tragedy of indifference. It begins as a shield, but ends as a filter that blocks the very light it was meant to protect you from. Psychologists call it emotional blunting, a neurological adaptation that numbs you to prevent overload. The brain, bombarded with too much emotional input, begins to reduce its response to stimuli, not just negative ones, but positive too. You feel less pain, but also less joy. You suffer less, but you also live less. And this erosion doesn't just happen inside individuals. It happens collectively. Societies become desensitized to injustice. Communities stop believing in change. Humanity begins to trade depth for efficiency, truth for comfort, meaning for momentum. The result is a civilization that runs faster and feels less. You can see it in the way people love now, half-heartedly, distractedly, with one eye always looking elsewhere. You can hear it in the way they talk, guarded, ironic, emotionally distant. Even our language has adapted to our numbness. Sincerity now sounds naive. Vulnerability sounds weak. We have mistaken detachment for strength. But real strength was never about feeling less. It was about feeling without being destroyed. And yet the longer indifference reigns, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between wisdom and withdrawal. The stoic and the broken now look the same, calm on the outside, silent on the inside. The consequences of this confusion are subtle but devastating. When a generation loses the capacity for genuine emotional depth, its art becomes decorative rather than transformative. Its relationships become transactional. Its politics become performative. Its spirituality becomes an accessory. We start to live as though life were something to be observed, not experienced. Arthur Schopenhauer once described existence as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Indifference is the point where the pendulum stops. Not because peace has been found, but because motion itself has died. And when that stillness spreads across entire societies, history pauses. Progress halts. Creativity decays. Not through catastrophe, but through quiet surrender. Because indifference doesn't destroy by violence. It destroys by neglect. It lets gardens wither not by pulling the roots, but by simply forgetting to water them. That's how great civilizations fall. Not when they are conquered, but when they stop caring enough to defend what once mattered. But this indifference is not entirely evil. It is, in some sense, the mind's last defense against a world that demands too much. It's what allows a doctor to work through tragedy, a soldier to act under fire, a survivor to endure loss. It can give you clarity where others drown in chaos. The danger arises only when you forget why you became indifferent in the first place. When the defense becomes identity. When numbness becomes normal. And perhaps that is the most terrifying consequence of all, that you may wake up one day not realizing that your indifference has calcified into your personality. You'll no longer say, "I'm tired," but "that's just who I am." And yet, somewhere beneath the stillness, something small and human still stirs. A whisper, a memory of what it felt like to care deeply. Not for recognition, not for validation, but simply because life itself demanded your heart. That whisper is the beginning of rebellion. Because indifference, while powerful, is not permanent. It is a phase of the soul, a necessary darkness that tests whether you can live without illusion. But if you stay there too long, it consumes you. The question then becomes, how do you awaken again, without losing the wisdom your indifference has given you? How do you care again, without being controlled by caring? How do you rejoin the world, without being enslaved by it? That is where the rebellion begins. There comes a point where silence stops being peace and becomes paralysis, where stillness, once sacred, starts to rot. You sense it, that quiet ache beneath the numbness. It's not loud, not desperate, just a faint, persistent pulse. You're meant to feel again. This is where the rebellion begins. Not against others, not even against the world, but against your own indifference. Against the part of you that decided it was safer not to care. Against the illusion that detachment equals mastery. Because real mastery isn't found in escaping emotion, it's found in commanding it. Breaking free from indifference doesn't mean returning to naive passion or blind optimism. It means rediscovering a deeper, quieter form of engagement, one that is born not from desperation, but from choice. You begin by asking the most difficult question of all: what still matters to me when nothing else does? That question cuts through illusion like a blade. It reveals the few truths that remain when the noise is gone. Maybe it's the sound of your child's laughter. Maybe it's a craft, a cause, a memory of beauty that once moved you beyond reason. It doesn't have to be grand. It only has to be real. And here lies the paradox. Indifference strips life of its false meanings so that you can rediscover the genuine ones. It burns away the artificial until only the essential remains. But to reach that essence, you must be willing to confront the void that indifference leaves behind. You must stare into it, not as a victim, but as an architect. Because meaning, once destroyed, does not return by accident. It must be rebuilt. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." This is the key to transcending indifference. It's not about reigniting all emotion. It's about finding your why again. A reason strong enough to move even the most silent parts of your soul. That why does not have to come from the world. In fact, it rarely does. It comes from within. From a choice to live deliberately, not reactively. To decide that you will feel again, but only for what is true, not for what manipulates. This is where the indifferent soul begins its transformation. From apathy to awareness, from withdrawal to wisdom. To break free, you must reverse the direction of your attention. For too long, it has been pointed outward, toward screens. Validation, control. Now it must turn inward, toward the vast and often terrifying landscape of the self. Carl Jung described this as the process of individuation, the journey through the unconscious to reclaim the lost fragments of the psyche, the parts you buried to survive, the emotions you numbed to keep functioning, the dreams you dismissed because the world told you they were impractical. You cannot transcend indifference without first confronting the reasons you built it. You became indifferent because you cared too much and were wounded. You became indifferent because you tried to control what was never yours. You became indifferent because the world sold you counterfeit meaning, and you bought it. So, breaking. Free begins with honesty. Brutal, unwavering honesty. Ask yourself, where did my caring die? Who killed it? You may find it wasn't one moment but 1,000 small ones. A slow suffocation under the weight of disappointment. Forgive yourself for that. Because indifference was not cowardice. It was your mind's way of keeping you alive. But survival is not the same as living. Once you understand that, the rebellion becomes clear. The goal is not to destroy indifference, but to master it, to wield it like a blade, sharp enough to cut through illusion, but sheathed when not in use. Indifference, in its purest form, is not a void. It's a vantage point. From it, you can observe the world without drowning in it. You can care with precision, not compulsion. You can love with depth, not dependence. It is the difference between being consumed by fire and containing it. This is where emotional discipline replaces emotional apathy, where you choose what deserves your energy and what does not. To feel again, you must first learn how not to be enslaved by feeling. That means confronting the two forces that feed indifference: fear and control. Fear convinces you that caring will destroy you again. Control convinces you that if you can't shape the outcome, it's not worth trying. To overcome fear, you must remember, pain is not proof of failure. It's proof of life. To overcome control, you must surrender, not to chaos, but to reality. To the truth that life will hurt you, betray you, surprise you. And that's exactly what makes it real. The opposite of indifference is not constant happiness. It's presence. Presence means you are here, fully, vulnerably, consciously. It means you don't need to escape your emotions, nor cling to them. You let them come. You let them go. You let life touch you again. But you no longer mistake every touch for truth. Think of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, men who lived in chaos but found serenity within it. They were not indifferent. They were awake. They felt deeply, but were no longer controlled by feeling. That is the rebellion. To awaken. To stop confusing detachment with transcendence. To stop mistaking numbness for wisdom. To care again, but differently, consciously. Because the real danger is not in caring too little. It's in caring without awareness. When you care without awareness, you are manipulated. When you care with awareness, you are invincible. So the rebellion is not about feeling more, but about feeling rightly. Not about caring for everything, but for what aligns with your inner truth. To the indifferent soul, the world once looked meaningless. But now it begins to look clear, painfully, beautifully clear. You start to see that indifference was never your enemy. It was your teacher. It stripped away illusion so you could rediscover authenticity. And authenticity, that raw, unfiltered encounter with what's real, is where true freedom begins. The question now is, once you've broken free, what will you do with that freedom? Because freedom without direction is just another form of emptiness. To transcend indifference completely, you must move beyond liberation into creation. Imagine standing on the edge of everything you once were. Your past selves, your old desires, your broken beliefs, and realizing that they no longer hold you. You look back at the versions of you that cried for meaning, that chased validation, that begged the world to make sense, and you feel no anger toward them, only compassion. You understand now that they were necessary. Without their pain, you could not have reached this silence. Without their illusions, you could not have learned what illusion was. You are not numb anymore. You are clear. And this clarity feels different from peace. Peace is fragile. It depends on the absence of disturbance. Clarity, however, survives. The storm. It sees through it. This is the final transformation of indifference, when it ceases to be a defense and becomes understanding. You begin to realize that indifference was never about not caring. It was about learning how to care. It taught you that meaning is not something given, but something created. That love is not dependency, but awareness. That compassion is not weakness, but strength without ego. You have crossed through the wasteland of emotional emptiness and emerged into a landscape of deliberate feeling, where you no longer react, but respond, where you no longer seek to possess the world, but to perceive it. Here, your emotions are not rulers, they are instruments. You play them, but they no longer play you. And in this mastery, something profound dawns on you. Indifference, when misunderstood, leads to isolation, but when understood, it leads to transcendence. Think of it this way. The sun doesn't love or hate the earth, yet its light gives life to everything. It shines not because it cares in a human sense, but because it is. That's the nature of true power. Effortless, impartial, yet infinitely giving. That is what awakened indifference becomes, not the cold absence of feeling, but the radiant stillness of presence. You are no longer pulled by pleasure or pain, success or failure, approval or rejection. You move with intention, not compulsion. This is what the ancient philosophers meant by ataraxia, the unshakable tranquility of one who sees the world clearly. The Buddhists called it equanimity, the state of perfect balance between attachment and aversion. The mystics called it union with the real. It is the point where you no longer resist life, nor chase it. You simply participate in it fully, consciously, without distortion. You begin to see how the universe itself is indifferent. Not cruelly, but naturally. It neither favors nor condemns. It allows. It unfolds. And within that neutrality lies the possibility of infinite beauty. Because when nothing is forced, everything can be. You start to see how human suffering often arises from misunderstanding this neutrality. We demand that life care about our hopes and plans. We expect meaning to be given. We beg the universe to act with justice, to reward the good, to punish the wicked. But the universe does not operate in moral currency. It operates in balance. Once you understand that, you stop asking life to be fair, and instead, you begin to act with fairness within life. You stop asking for meaning, and begin giving meaning to what you do. You stop searching for love, and start becoming love in motion. That is the paradoxical gift of indifference. It destroys your illusions of control, so that you can finally create from truth. You remember all the times you mistook feeling deeply for living deeply. Now you see that depth is not measured by intensity, but by awareness. You can look at suffering and not turn away. You can look at beauty and not cling. You can stand in the middle of life's contradictions and smile. Not because they don't affect you, but because you finally understand them. You've transcended the dualities that enslaved you: success and failure, gain and loss, love and indifference. You see now that they are not opposites, but reflections of the same eternal movement. The mind seeks control. The heart seeks meaning. But the awakened soul seeks only truth, and truth is beyond emotion. When you reach this point, you no longer fear the void. You recognize it as space, infinite, silent, fertile. The void was never empty. It was waiting for your awareness to fill it. There's a quiet smile forming on your lips now. Not of joy, not of triumph, but of understanding. You realize that indifference was never the enemy of the heart. It was the mirror that showed you its limits. It stripped you down to nothing so you could rebuild yourself on something real. You are no longer driven by the need to prove, to win, to impress. You do not seek validation from the crowd or comfort from the familiar. You live in alignment with something simpler, the rhythm of existence itself. You don't escape the world. You enter it more deeply than ever, because you no longer resist it. And when you love now, it's not from need, but from abundance. When you act, it's not from impulse, but from presence. When you care, it's not because you must, but because it is natural to do so. This is what it means to be free. In the end, indifference was not the end of your humanity. It was its purification. It stripped away the false layers until only awareness remained. Awareness without attachment, compassion without exhaustion, strength without hardness. You have become, at last, like the still flame, unmoved by wind, yet illuminating all that surrounds it. This is the highest form of power. Not dominance, not control, but inner sovereignty. To be capable of caring deeply without being broken, by caring. To walk through chaos without losing your center. To live fully, fiercely, quietly, without needing the world to understand. Now you understand the secret. Indifference is not emptiness, it is space. Not weakness, but wisdom. Not the death of feeling, but the birth of choice. The world will keep shouting, begging you to react, to feel, to consume. But you will listen differently now. You will see through every noise, every manipulation, every illusion that once held you. Because once you have mastered indifference, nothing owns you. And from that mastery comes the greatest gift of all. The freedom to love, to create, to exist purely. Not because you need to, but because you choose to.